And sing again.
Second try. Okay. Extinction. So this is our next RBT. Oh yeah, that's good. RBT training. This one's about extinction, which is the purpose of extinction. Extinction gives us a way to decrease problem behavior without using punishment. So we use our understanding of the function of behavior, like what we already talked about, to make behavior ineffective. So this goes back to those kind of like knee-jerk reactions to behavior and traditional responses to behavior where it's like, good God, make it stop, I don't know what to do. All I can think to do is to like make it not benefit this person by providing a bad consequence. But so with extinction, we don't have to do that. All we have to do, since we know why the behavior is happening, we just use that and we make it so that it's no longer effective. So the definition of extinction is extinction happens when the maintaining consequence, meaning the function, no longer follows the behavior, so the behavior decreases or goes away altogether. So this is the main mechanism that we use to decrease challenging behavior. Sometimes we might use punishment like a response cost system or some sort of like a timeout system, but we only do that after we decide that extinction is hard to do. So there are some important implications for this definition. So extinction is defined by the fact that it causes a behavior to decrease, not by what the extinguisher is doing. This is very similar to what we talked about, how reinforcement and punishment are defined by their effect on behavior, not by like a reinforcer is a piece of candy or a reinforcer is a hug or praise. No, a reinforcer is something that makes behavior increase. Same thing as this. Extinction is not ignoring. Extinction is not follow through. Extinction is when the maintaining reinforcer does not happen anymore and behavior just decreases because of it. So just like with reinforcement, it's not reinforcement unless the behavior is increasing. Extinction is not extinction unless the behavior is decreasing. So it's kind of, if you hear people say, like, I'm reinforcing, but the behavior is not happening, then you're not reinforcing. So the same thing goes for this. If you feel like you want to say, I'm extinguishing this behavior and it's still happening, I don't understand. No, you're not extinguishing it, and there's probably an issue with the function, because if you want to extinguish a behavior, you have to withhold the maintaining consequence or somehow prevent it from happening. So which means, of course, that you need to know what that consequence is, which means you need to know the function. So extinction for each function. Extinction is function-based and depends on what the function is for a particular behavior, and it's going to look different for each function. So you can't say, if someone asks you, like, how do you extinguish aggression, you can't answer that unless you know the function. So if somebody said, like, hey, what's a good protocol for elopement? Hey, what's a good protocol for, I have this kid that engages in property destruction, like, what should I do? No function. So for escape, extinction means that the behavior no longer gets escaped from the demand, which what the procedure looks like, what you're actually going to do is basically follow through with all your demands, especially when you see inappropriate behavior or challenging behavior. For attention, the behavior no longer gets attention, so what that looks like is ignoring. A lot of times we use ignoring, we provide minimal attention across the board as a way to prevent a behavior from learning that it gets attention. So sometimes people think like, oh, ABA is all about ignoring behavior and attending to good behavior. That's not necessarily the whole picture. That really only applies if attention is the function. For tangible, the behavior does not produce access to the item or activity. So what the person will actually do, if you say like, I'm going to extinguish this tangible maintained behavior, when you see the behavior, you're going to withhold whatever the tangible is and not let them have it while they're engaging in that behavior. And then for automatic, the behavior no longer produces that preferred sensation. This gets hard because you can't control that consequence. Like if I scratch my head, there's nothing you can do to make it not relieve an itch. You can block me from scratching my head, but that's still not really extinction. So you have to kind of get creative, but we'll talk more about that later. So escape extinction in more detail, the basic procedure is follow through. So you're going to follow through with every demand in order to extinguish existing behaviors and to prevent new escape behaviors. The follow through involves prompting. So sometimes following through with the demand doesn't mean that you just keep saying like, so say you say clean up and then they don't, because they don't want to clean up, to escape from cleanup. So if you just say like clean up, 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 and that's not being effective, then you need to go ahead and physically prompt like, no, we're gonna clean up. In fact, the longer you delay that jumping in with the physical prompt, the more escape they're getting. So if you lose this battle, then you're gonna see behaviors over and over again. This is where it can get hard because say you have someone who is kind of big and strong, and you're working with them at the table in some sort of like trial task, and they're trying to escape, the more they struggle and the more they escape, the more effective their behavior is at getting escape. So if they run away from you before you can catch them, then like they win that battle and they're gonna run away again. If they like struggle out and get another 2 seconds from the task, then they're gonna keep doing that. So your best strategy is to be like really on your toes and fast and aware. Sometimes it's just a matter of speed. Like I've seen people, sit with their kid and their kid is next to them and then the kid runs away, which if that happens once, that's fine. Okay, now like I'm gonna either arrange my seating so that that I can prevent that, be preventative about it, like, or I'm at least gonna know like if they like be ready to like boom, grab, and not let them get away, because every time they run away, they're getting escape and they'll just keep doing it. So what you'll learn as you do this, once you start having to follow through with every demand, you'll probably learn very quickly that you have to be careful about the demands you give, because sometimes we don't always intend them as a demand. So you have to make sure you're in a position to follow through. So say you're one adult with 5 kids, I wouldn't use that time to give a really non-preferred instruction that's not likely to follow, because maybe you have to tend to all your other kids. It's distance can be a factor. So if you'll have an idea of like this kid tends to not comply with instructions. So if I'm across the room from my kid and I say clean up, that doesn't put me in a very good position to follow through with it. So things where I know I might have an issue, and you might know this or you might have to learn it throughout the session because it's a new learner or a learner that you're new to. You wanna give yourself the best chance to follow through that you can. You might run into an issue with behaviors that can't be prompted. Do you guys have examples of these ones that are like impossible or difficult to prompt?
Well, like verbal.
Anything verbal?
Yeah.
Any kind of like,
Anything vocal?
yeah, anything
gross motor.
or communication-ish.
Sometimes depending. If it's like stomp feet. I mean, some like you can usually prompt someone to clap, but if it's like a complicated movement or something that involves their
Multiple
lower
steps.
body.
Right, I was thinking trunk.
Yeah. Especially if they're big and strong. Eye contact usually.
That's the guy goes.
Sometimes you can't prompt like
To hear.
say it nicely. Sometimes it's like you're in the middle of behavior, it's aggression. You want to prompt like ask me for a break instead of engaging in aggression to get a break. And so it's like, I want a break. And then it's like, say it nicely. Like, well, you can't make them say it nicely, so you might be there for a while.
Right.
And then that puts you in those battles where, what do you do at that point? You can't follow through. So if you know that you might have a kid who engages in escape behaviors, be very careful about what demands you present, because you want to put yourself in a position to be effective and to follow through with your instructions, so that that kid learns like, oh, when this person says something, I need to do it. Sometimes what we think of it as a demand might not match our kiddos. Like when we say like, hey, come on, let's play Legos, because it's a new kid and you're trying to like find out what's reinforcing for them, you're trying to pair with them, and like this kid hates Legos. All this kid wants to do is line up trains. And so for you saying Legos is like something that's been terribly paired with for this kid. And so the kid is like, no, and engages in a behavior that's not good. What the reaction might initially be is, this kid is diagnosed with autism, they can't communicate, this is part of their disorder, it was my mistake, you know, I should have said like, do you want to play Legos? I'm just going to take that information for what it is and say like, okay, this kid doesn't like Legos, I'm not going to push it. But when you do that, you encourage that behavior and you're like harming their life. And these behaviors for these kids, it's one thing when they're 3 and they throw a Lego, but if we keep reinforcing it, it could end them up in a hospital, or, you know, throwing things is not a big deal when it's a Lego and a 3-year-old, but throwing things becomes a huge deal when it's an 18-year-old.
And it's knives.
And knives. Or chairs and furniture, you know what I mean? Because if it was effective, it will happen again. And you can kind of make yourself feel a little bit better about that, because when you consider like, yes, what if you did this with a typically developing kid and they didn't want to play Legos? If you said like, no, let's do this, if you followed through, they probably wouldn't throw things and have an absolute meltdown, which shows you that there is an adaptive alternative to this. You don't have to like doing everything, but you do have to not engage in dangerous behavior. So to do this, you want to make optional things questions and non-optional things instructions. People make both these mistakes, so that's a mistake with like, hey, come play Legos. You know, and then I see dangerous behavior, or behavior that eventually will be dangerous. I can't reinforce it. Or I say like, hey, you ready to work? And then it's like, nope. And it's like,
give them a question.
okay.
Can you sit down?
That was appropriate, yeah.
Can you sit down for me?
Want to come sit down? Yeah.
All the time.
So if you mean it to be a choice, present it as a choice, and this will save you a lot of that follow through that you're like, ugh, I don't even want to I don't want to make this kid play Legos. Like, I was trying to pair with you. We were trying to have a good time, and now we're in this big meltdown. But at that point, when you're seeing the behavior, you have to interrupt that reinforcement.
So like if you're like, hey, come sit down, he said no, but just like, okay, and like give him like 3 or 4 seconds, and like, okay,
Yeah.
then you're like, okay, come sit
Yeah.
down. Right.
You just,
Then
be like,
you make
okay,
it.
fair enough.
I was gonna say, hey, thanks for telling me, but come sit down.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Then you.
Be like, okay, play for 10 more
second.
seconds, and then you can be like, okay, in 5 we're going to sit down, or in 2 we're
Right.
going to sit down.
One thing to do with it, the biggest thing that I've been seeing lately are people asking yes/no questions of clients that don't have that skill.
Yeah.
That has been rampant. It's just like, did I say yes or no?
It is a little, yeah. Because then you want to follow, like, not answering questions correctly is a maladaptive behavior. So you want to prompt it, but sometimes yes/no questions are hard to prompt because
Do we know
it's
their
like,
preference?
yeah, like, what's your favorite? Hey, Erin, how you doing today? If you're going to prompt an answer, you have to say like, say good. You know what I mean? Or like, what's your favorite ice cream? You have to, if you end up having to prompt an answer, you have to say like, say yes, or say
Chocolate.
the ice cream, yeah. So, and that goes back to, we talked about this earlier, but that goes back to when you're working with your client, part of the pairing process is not only pairing yourself with reinforcement, but also getting to know the skill level of your client so that you can use that to inform how you interact with them the entire session. So sometimes simply avoiding the task for even a few seconds might be enough to maintain the behavior, so be quick. This goes back to the fact that these functions are really just categories, and so usually there's something more specific maintaining this behavior. So if escape is the function, then it might be like escape from math, or like escape from boring tasks, or escape in the form of daydreaming. So you kind of have to identify, like, you know, if this kid gets escape for 3 seconds, that's enough to keep it going, or like it's not. Next one, attention extinction, is kind of obvious. So the function of the behavior is to get attention. So attention is what's keeping it going. So attention, is cut off when the behavior happens. So you want to ignore it, which means no eye contact, no physical contact, no words, no increased proximity, and no changing your orientation to face the person. This has a little like asterisk because obviously you can imagine what if the behavior is elopement or aggression or something like property destruction. You can't just completely ignore that. That would be silly. So instead what we use is, we call it minimal attention, where you keep the situation safe, you might have to follow through with the behavior, but you don't give any excessive eye contact. Like you can face someone and make sure they're being safe and not look directly at them. You can, as much as possible, if you think attention is the function and if you think physical guidance plays a role, you can use gestures or verbal instructions. If verbal interaction plays a role, then you can minimize your words. You can increase proximity without like getting all up in their face, and then I don't know, the orientation, it depends. So you just want to use minimal examples, minimal attention. So we're going to do, I'm just going to like model a response to behavior, and then you guys just tell me if that would be considered minimal attention or if it would be considered like more attention than what's necessary. So like what's the behavior?
Just like screaming for attention, like
Right. It's for attention?
mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. So scream. That's not even one, like that's not a dangerous behavior, so that I don't need to say stop screaming. And that gets really tricky when you get into those verbal instructions to tell someone to stop doing something. For some kids it might be effective, and for some kids even that direction is like, cool, I gotcha, thanks for responding, thanks for playing, see you again this time tomorrow where I'll scream at you all day.
As soon as I get quiet.
So that type of information will definitely be in their behavior plan as a procedure. It'll either say like completely ignore, it'll say tell one time, use a quiet voice. Yes.
Do you do an example of maybe someone's putting like a sharp object in their mouth, like some of our kids are known to do?
Yes. Okay, so like pretend.
To have, you want
attack in your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna get attacked.
Is that
This is good enough.
we can pretend. You don't have to eat attack. For a training sake. Oh.
It's a paper clip.
It's a paper clip.
But here's the problem with that particular situation is because that kid will fight you to the ground to get it.
And we'll like already.
And then you're in the ground and you're wrestling a kid with an attack.
Right.
That's
And
what
then-
happened to me that day.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then he's trying to stab you with it, and then it amps it up
And
to
his
like
pockets
the
are
more
filled
dangerous
with other
level.
stuff.
With other
Right.
dangerous things. Trying to look at
But not him though. Usually, but most typically no. Other than him, it is like you can't usually
So-
just remove it.
Usually you can't, but
Yes.
no, because he's usually doing this.
Oh, I know what it is.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, and then a lot of these are situational, and we get a lot more effective when we know our kids really well, because in that case, if you know that, depends whether or not, I mean, that's a big risk to take. We're not going to ask any of you to take that risk and say like, he's bluffing, he's not going to eat the tack, because what if that happened?
Right.
So in that situation, if you're running into that where like that physical interaction, so minimal attention could have looked like, give me the tack right now. And maybe he's a rule follower or an instruction, maybe he has like that history of like following instructions, so then I have it. maybe all that touching and like difficult, that like pressure was reinforcing. Maybe he thinks it's funny. So it kind of depends. You kind of just have to learn as you go.
Yes.
But definitely though, what you did with the taking it away and not addressing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely don't want to say like, we don't eat tax or like any, and that goes back to that wanting to, that urge that like this behavior is happening because they don't get it because they're trying to, they're doing it on purpose, which like they might be doing it on purpose, but that's not the issue. The issue is it's getting your attention, and then discussing it is your intention.
Or even like hitting like kids who are nonverbal instead of like just hitting you just to do something.
Yeah, just to like whatever. Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, it would depend
how hard they're hitting you.
How hard they're hitting. If it's not if it's a 3-year-old, like you can hit me all day. If it's an 18-year-old, then like you want to do something. And we'll go into more like how to actually work through problem behavior. This is just the attention piece and trying not to encourage it to happen again and again. And then it's also important to understand whose attention is the reinforcer. So if you're working with a kid and you're in a social group and they're making inappropriate comments like using swear words because their other kids are laughing, and you're like, that's attention, I'm going to ignore it, but the other kids are laughing, then like, no. Yeah, you need to figure out something. Because you need to cut off the attention from the other kids, which is probably not going to be very, like, at least our kids, you can't just say like, hey, I would like you to not laugh.
Can you ignore him, please?
Occasionally that might work. Some kids are good at that.
There was somebody who was really good at ignoring one of our clients. I don't remember who it was.
But so then in that case, you would see that's a situation when we can't do extinction. Like that's not extinction because we're not withholding the reinforcer. The reinforcer doesn't come from us. And then just a little note, physically, this is the easiest procedure because no one controls your intention but you. Even if it's a tangible, like with, say you want access to the TAC, it's a little bit difficult for me to withhold access because you're physically trying to get it from me. Like my attention, it's like I'm in total control of my attention. It should be pretty easy. That said, people have the hardest time with this. Because when Courtney was getting like, when it doesn't work, and we'll talk about this more too, they increase it, and then it like, don't nobody ignore yelling in their face in life. Like that's not the way anybody was raised. That's not the way. Right. If you were babysitting, if you're 18 years old, babysitting someone's kid, and they're behaving inappropriately, and you're like, this is just for attention, I'm gonna ignore it, and you came home and the kid was like acting crazy, and the babysitter is just like ignoring, that parent's gonna be like, you're never babysitting for me again, because they expect the adult to step in and stop it and give like a firm instruction to say like no, which occasionally might work for a kid, but a lot of the time it's just giving them the attention that they want.
Everybody wants that false sense of control.
You what?
I said everyone wants that false sense of control.
Just to like say you tried even to look like, and it gets here, it's not going to be bad. You're going to feel pretty comfortable doing this because this is what everybody else is doing, and this is what like your person who hired you and your bosses and everybody else here is telling you to do, and they're watching you do it, and they're saying, good job ignoring that kid screaming and crying on the floor, which will never happen anywhere. We go out into the community, and when you do this, you're going to feel like a total idiot in front of other people. It's going to be really weird, and that's when it comes down to like what's more important, like changing this kid's behavior or like avoiding looks. So just to be aware. Tangible extinction means you can bite, kick, scream, spit, cry, insult, hit, flail, yell as much as you want, but you're not getting this thing that you're after, whatever it is. A lot of times, behavior that's maintained by access to tangibles will happen when you remove an item or when you say no, you can't have that. So usually it's pretty easy to identify like the specific item that they want. And then this one's actually kind of easy too, like attention, other than maintaining safety of the situation. Technically, the main thing is like they don't get that thing. Some kids will persist and persist and persist and persist. So a lot of times what you can do is redirect to like move the item out out of sight, out of mind, and like get them somewhere else, get them doing something else without providing a lot of fun attention, because then even if this isn't the actual function, you don't want to teach like, oh hey, here's a little bonus, you get a lot of attention. And then here's what happens, I think more often than, a lot of times I don't think people do give in the main object, but they're like, oh my gosh, this kid is flipping out. If they are diagnosed with autism, it probably has, if they have a disability, they're going to be, it's probably a communication issue. It's probably not, this kid's just doing this to get it, like manipulatively. It's probably a communication issue, so the person feels bad, and then they say, grandma's going to get you a toy. So you introduce something else, and it's like, if you stop, you can go play video games. If you just stop, it's like, if you just stop, you can have whatever. Not the original item, but something else, just as fun. So the kid learns, if I behave, I get an offer to stop, I stop, I get what I want. So you teach this like weird chain. So you want to make sure when you do try to redirect and distract them and get them off of this behavior, you don't do it to like, oh, let's go on the trampoline, or like, let's go do your favorite activity, because that will stop the behavior. They'll be like, okay, cool. But then you just reinforce it. So you can redirect to a neutral activity. You could even redirect to work if you want, which like, technically that's kind of a punishment because you're introducing a consequence to decrease behavior, but it's very mild, and it's like, we are here to work, so it's not going to kill anybody. And then there are a lot of things that you can do preventatively, which we'll go more into detail about this later, but you can keep off-limits items out of reach, just generally like keep them up, keep them to the side, or prevent access, so that you don't get this like them continually trying to access the behavior and being so tempted because it's right there. You can use countdowns to let them know that the time to give up the item is coming. And then I talked about this already, but you don't want to start just making offerings when the inappropriate behavior is occurring. And
like the family that I was working with, that mom and dad had these issues because the child would engage in like really negative behavior toward the mom because she couldn't have a brownie, and dad would be like, mom said you couldn't have a brownie, so let's get ice cream, alright? Yeah. It was just like,
yeah. It's like, don't give in, and then you're like, I didn't give in, I took them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Let's go get ice cream. So sensory extinction, we kind of talked about this, but it gets really hard because that's not a consequence you can control. Like if you jump on the bed, it's not about preventing the behavior. Like with that tangible tantrum, I'm not stopping you from kicking and flailing and throwing yourself on the floor. I'm just stopping you from getting this cookie or toy or whatever it is. With sensory, if you let the behavior happen, it's just being reinforced. So a lot of times we can't do extinction. So instead, we want to be preventative. So you kind of want to block it, especially if it's dangerous. In my experience, gentle blocking is more effective than like kind of strong blocking, because then kids tend to just like resist that. You still want to give it minimal attention because you don't want to teach an attention function. And sometimes you can use protective equipment. So if you have a kid who engages in headbanging, you want to put them in a helmet. This is not obviously a choice that you guys will be like, I determined need for helmet.
Yeah.
And we
This
go,
would be like a good touch of like pairing that with like redirection, I guess, too.
yeah. That's a big.
You did have that on there.
Is it on there?
Yeah.
And then so we do want to do. We're going to get into replacement behaviors later, but sometimes, like say. Like if you have hand flapping, maybe a toy that is like kind of fun and wiggly, right, and like produces the same, maybe it's visual. You have to figure out what it is about what sensation is they like, because a kid might hand flap. Do they like the way it looks? Do they like that sound that it makes? Do they like the feelings of their fingers flapping together?
If you saw a kid
Figuring-
that would bang his tooth,
Right.
and so then they gave like something to kind of chew on, and
Yeah.
that stopped him for a little bit.
Yes.
When he was chewing, he wouldn't be.
He needs
Do
to
that.
Bang his tooth.
He did.
Yeah.
And then at that point, so is it like, does he like the feeling on his finger? Does he like the feeling on his tooth? Does his tooth hurt?
Right.
They were gonna have to. They were talking about taking the nerve
Oh my gosh.
out.
That would actually be extinction.
Mhm.
Because sometimes you can, because then you let the behavior happen, but now it doesn't produce that sensation anymore.
Right.
So there are ways that you could do that, like,
That's-
I don't know, like if a kid flicks because they like the sound and you put a mitten on them, then they can still flick, but it doesn't produce that sound. So there are ways to do it, but it gets really tricky. You're going to work with the behavior consultant on this regardless. And then usually what you end up asking with automatically reinforced behavior is the behavior a priority in the first place? Because a lot of them, like, hand flapping, it's like whatever. If they're, if it's not a
What else are they
serious
doing?
impairment to their learning
Right.
and it's not dangerous, that'll impair social interactions, but especially if this kid has other more serious impairments and behaviors, we're not going to work on it. Because putting ourselves in a position where we're always trying to block something that a kid is doing constantly gets really, really, really hard.
Mhm.
Like nose picking is an automatically maintained behavior. And if you're going to decide to tackle that, then like you're going to be constantly, blocking it, or automatically reinforced behavior is a time when you kind of can look to artificial contrived reinforcement to say like, oh, you didn't do it for 5 minutes, you get a sticker. And that can be really effective for this kind of behavior. And sometimes also what you do is teach time and place. So it's like you can rock and hand flap, just not while we're doing it, not while we're working at the table. Or like you can masturbate just in the bathroom at your home, not in Walmart. So a lot of that is really what that issue, because that's what happens with adult behavior. It's like, I like watching TV, but I don't watch TV all day long because I have a job, because I have friends and like a variety of interests, and so I've learned to like appropriate time and place and appropriate quantity. So things to remember about extinction. This is where it gets kind of tricky, and like one of the most important things. So typically the pattern, what the data looks like with extinction, is a slow, gradual decrease. So you're not going to see like, we're doing extinction and then the behavior is done the next day. It's going to take, it's going to take a long time. The other thing you see is when you start like, okay, we're going to start extinction, and then what happens is it actually gets worse. So you can just kind of imagine this anecdotally with a lot of situations. So say you're going to a vending machine and you put out your dollar and you put it in. So the behavior is pressing the button and the reinforcement is Coke comes out. Now you put in the dollar, press the button once, you're in extinction, which means no reinforcer, no Coke comes out. What do?
Hit the button again.
Hit again.
Hit again.
And again.
Hit again.
Kick it,
Again.
shake it,
Yeah.
punch it.
Yeah.
Everything.
Like,
But as you go, you like increase.
yeah. So you start like, what? No, what? So you're going to see, so here are all our things, more of the same behavior. So pushing, you're going to see more pushing, and the rate's going to get higher. So faster pushing, more pushing. More intense version of the same behavior. So you're going to be like, push hard. And you're going to see, this is where it gets really, really difficult. You're going to see new behaviors. So that's when you see like hitting, pushing, swearing, calling your,
Kicking,
calling the bear,
crying.
Rocking the vending machine.
Yeah.
Getting
all kinds
arrested
of
at
stuff. But
Walmart.
eventually, like, so
It's the worst.
if this situation was you and you came up and you put your money in and now it's gone, like, would you keep doing that indefinitely?
And probably call the number on the machine.
Or I would just
But that's
go,
it. That's
or I would
another
just
behavior.
leave and never
Eventually
use
you give
that.
up. So you do give up. People don't do things that don't work. That's the whole thing we've been talking about, is like people only do things that are functional. If it stops being functional and getting you something, eventually you'll stop doing it. It's just a rough kind of a ride.
If you start enjoying pushing their buttons,
Mm-hmm.
then you're there.
Function
Sleeping at Walmart.
So you can imagine this with a lot of scenarios.
Giving those Staples buttons on.
Are we gonna watch this extinction video?
Yes. So the main thing for you to know is, number one, if you see the behavior increase, don't think this isn't working. You need to think like, haha, I gotcha, kid. This is working. I found your reinforcer. We're almost there. You also need to be prepared. This is sometimes when we don't do this extinction, and this will be a group decision coming from your behavior consultant, but you know, if this kid has been aggressive one time and they've shown, but they typically aren't, but they've shown that they can be, and the behavior is kind of like tantruming and, you know, minor throwing objects, you put them in extinction, like they might become very aggressive. So you kind of have to be aware of that, and you have to say like, okay, I'm in the community alone. I want to extinguish this. What's worst case scenario, and can I handle it, and can I maintain extinction? Because what happens is people don't realize that it's going to get worse, that it's going to get more variable, that it might get super crazy, and they say, you know what, I get this. I'm not going to let you have your way. I'm not going to let throwing things escape from cleanup. I'm going to make you clean up. And so the kid who used to throw things start to like, let's clean up. We're going to physically prompt this, and then the kid is like, and like punches in the face, and they're like, oh shit, I didn't realize you didn't want to clean up that much. Never mind. And now you've
Yeah.
and then now you've taught that. So that's how behavior gets shaped, from whining to crying to like screaming, and then maybe even into like aggression and full-on tantrums, because parents get it. They do get it on some level that like the behavior is functional and they need to stop that. But then what they don't get is, this is what's going to happen, and you need to be prepared for it. So
and I feel like extinction is one of the hardest ones to learn and be good at. It does take time and practice to like become really good at extinction.
Well, it's counterintuitive to a parent.
it is.
Right.
Because that's how you're, like, and what happens with kids with autism a lot of times if they have language delays is a baby, it's okay for a baby to cry to communicate. And then, that transition when they start using words into being like 1 and 2, they call it the terrible twos for a reason, because they start having tantrums because they're in extinction for crying. Like, crying doesn't work anymore, and now the parent is like, use your words. But with a kid with autism who's not learning language, there are no words. So it gets really ugly.
Extinction can last a long time too.
And it can last a long time. And one of the things that, part of the definition before, or part of the explanation for thinking of behavior as functional is, this behavior happens because it serves a function for this person, only if occasionally. And so it's that, like, occasionally that makes people really persistent. So if you're working with a kid who is 12 and they've been engaging in this problem behavior for 11 years, and it's worked for them for 11 years, and at home it's like, maybe they do it, well, let's watch this video.
I'm gonna make some coffee so my throat hurts.
I know. I've been like a lunch. It should be going.
Is it up? You might have to make it full screen for the thing to recognize.
Oh, my volume. Hang on. Pause.
We see nothing.
Oh, you can't see anything?
I don't understand.
Oh, I hope that makes you able to see it. Yeah.
Extinction. We didn't miss that. That was my fault because I turned my
Turn your
back.
back. Also, a rule to note.
How do I make this go on the...
Is it full screen?
Yeah.
Can you like minimize this and full screen that? See if
Mom? Are they British?
Okay.
Always just turn your computer around, okay?
Yeah. Yes. And we'll just show it on the thing.
Yeah.
They'll be able to tell us what it is.
Shoe hop thing. It's like a hot ball. It's like toy.
I wonder. See? Is it showing it? No, it's not showing it very well, but
No, this is perfect.
well, for me.
I'm like,
There we go. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah.
You guys are gonna know what it is right away.
I'll save this one. So true.
So basically that's what happens. Like she couldn't handle it.
She couldn't put on Extinction forever.
She couldn't. And so
Oh, wait,
I mean,
what did you?
did I?
Yeah, you did.
I don't even notice. Huh. I didn't even know I did that. I must have picked that up somewhere and like didn't realize it.
Katie does that. Remember I told you Katie does this?
No.
She's always like, that's what things. It's always like,
Is she like the whole world needs to come together, Cooper?
everything is like this and this.
I just don't understand where they got that idea. Like that's awesome. I bet I start doing it now. That's I clearly just pick things up. I don't know.
that's weird that it's showing it now. Okay.
That was a good
So things
example.
to-
Yeah, that's a good example.
Because
But
then
she
that's what
gave it-
happens.
No.
So what did
What?
what was the
No.
function of that?
Attention.
Attention. And then it did
It
say again?
reinforced his behavior.
So and I can't, like, he said it 27 times. So what did she teach him?
if he keeps doing it long enough, she's
So
gonna react.
eventually-
She will get his.
So now she taught him, you need to say it 27 times, and he'd probably be perfect. Now that he got his reinforcement at
You would do
27
it for
times, I'm
100.
sure he'd be happy to go 50, 100,
Right.
yeah. And so that might be the situation that you come into with your kiddo, is that they've had a this behavior has been in place for almost their whole life, however old they've been, and it's been intermittently reinforced, like people have held out and then eventually they've given in.
That's how I feel about a lot of our kids who scream constantly. They realize that they scream long enough, they will
Eventually,
give
yeah.
in because it's going to drive their parents so crazy that they're finally, okay, take whatever you want, instead of just completely ignoring it and just letting it go.
Luckily what happens is, even though, like, kids learn to discriminate in different settings. So even though that behavior might continue with parents because they are still reinforcing, at first it'll affect their behavior with you because they're like, everybody gives in eventually. If you don't, their behavior will change with you,
Right.
and it won't change in the other setting because it's still being reinforced there.
I got shaped by nieces and nephews that way because they would used to always be like, if I was doing something like Cooper, Uncle Cooper, Uncle Cooper, Uncle Cooper, I would just completely ignore it.
Because parents are like, well,
Right, and I would just completely ignore them, and so now they don't. They never do that to
It
me.
did.
It's great.
It was the Stewie video where he's like, Mom, Mommy, Mom, Mother, Mom, 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 Mommy.
Oh my God, thank goodness it's coming.
So those are things to kind of remember. Don't be discouraged. More things to remember. Extinction is a powerful way to change behavior for the better. Even though it does have these setbacks. Another setback that I wasn't on there was that you can't always control the consequence. So sometimes if it's attention of other people, if it's escape and they're too strong or too fast for you to physically follow through, then like we might as well figure something else to do because they're just going to get escape over and over again because they're going to win. Like if you can't physically do it. So extinction is a powerful way to change behavior for the better, but it only. How come? Is it frozen?
I thought you found that.
You know I did. You know
When I said frozen, you
Yeah.
wanted to sing?
Yeah, I did. And when the girl for your graph was Elsa, and I remember thinking, was it for her outbursts of magic?
Okay, here we go.
Was that the baseline? But I didn't say anything because
But
I was
what are
like,
her
that's
assignments?
dorky. Yeah. But Cooper brought it up.
I was dorky as we
I
talked about
snorted on the
Dorothy and
spit.
poets yesterday.
Who's the dork now?
Still you.
Yeah.
Cut that out of the
Cooper insulting me.
Okay, back to this.
video.
And back to here. Okay. Last slide.
That was foolish.
Some last few important things to remember.
Looks like smoky or something. That was a big block to eat, probably.
So you want to stick with it. If you stick with it, you will see that slow, gradual decrease in behavior. I promise. If you are withholding the function. Some last things to remember. Extinction, powerful way. It only teaches what not to do. So basically, when you have a kid in extinction, you're just saying, don't do that behavior because it's not going to get you what you want. And we talked before about how all those functions are normal needs for people that everybody should be able to access if they need to. So of course you want to combine extinction with teaching what to do, which usually involves teaching communication. It involves teaching tolerating non-preferred activities. It usually involves procedures where you start small, where the learner is successful, and build from there. So say a kid is engaging in a lot of task avoidant behavior at the table, like they're throwing items, they're being non-compliant, they're screaming, they're throwing. You can use that. If they do it on the first trial when you pull them to the table, obviously they have no tolerance for work. So you start small, you start with like one trial. If they start engaging at 5 minutes, like they can work for 5 minutes and then they start to become like fatigued with the work and they start engaging it, then you know, like, okay, we need to reinforce 5 minutes of good work and reinforce that right there. And we've already learned a lot about prompting and prompt fadings, and those are the same strategies that we use to teach replacement behaviors. And you want to use those same consequences that reinforce the problem behavior to reinforce something else. I don't know what I was thinking about when I said the rats. So, but an example would be, so your reinforcer, so a kid is working and as soon as the demand is presented, he engages in screaming. What's the function? Escape. So when it says you use that you use escape, now you know, like, haha, some of our kids are really hard to find reinforcers for, but like all of their behavior has a function. If they're behaving, there is a reinforcer somewhere. So for this kid, like, it's escape. So you can use escape
As the reinforcer.
as the reinforcer. You want to build more reinforcers than that, but that's one that you have in your pot. If you see behavior that is trying to access escape, like, 15 trials and then they engage in escape behavior, use escape to reinforce 14 trials and then build up. So that's all that for extinction.